we up yet?
No, not yet. Takes a minute. No.
Yeah. We publicly stated already executive session, so. I want to thank you all for your patience, and now we'll proceed with the rest of the agenda. By way of announcements, the board held an executive session on Tuesday, March 6th to discuss the personnel matters and quasi-judicial deliberations on issues that were going to be discussed, what we thought was March 7th, but is now the session we just had for today's session. Additionally, I'd like to announce that the next Category 4 license auction will be held on April 4th at 10 a.m. in this room. Next, we have consideration of a motion to approve the minutes and transcript of the January 10th meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the minutes and transcripts of the January 10, 2018 meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Motion's adopted. Under new business, we now hear from Executive Director Kevin O'Toole.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, members of the board. I'm very appreciative of everyone being able to logistically organize your calendar to get in here and to participate, those who are participating in today's meeting, because we're still in the month of March, and March is a significant month for all treatment providers in the addiction area, for casino operators and for casino regulators to emphasize the need to keep people aware of, to educate people in the area of compulsive and problem gambling. So this is the month that we bring attention to that. And I've asked our Director of Administration, Claire Yantis, to present a resolution and to give a little background to that resolution.
Claire?
Good morning, Chairman, board members. Before you today is a resolution proclaiming March 2018 Problem Gambling Awareness Month, or PGAM. PGAM is a grassroots campaign started by the National Council on Problem Gambling 14 years ago to promote the availability of gambling addiction prevention programs, treatment options, and educational materials. During this month, the board's Office of Compulsive and Problem Gambling joins together with the Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs, the Pennsylvania Lottery, the Council on Compulsive Gambling of Pennsylvania, and other organizations to educate Pennsylvanians about the effects of gambling disorders, provide tools necessary to identify this addiction, and to recognize access to services that help minimize the consequences of disordered gambling. The goal of PGAM is to educate the general public and healthcare professionals about the warning signs of problem gambling, as well as raise awareness about treatment and prevention tools, like the board's self-exclusion program, that are available both locally and nationally. The self-exclusion program is offered to help those who have a gambling disorder and may be unable to suppress their impulse to gamble. This program, one of the most successful in the country, has helped thousands of individuals with gambling disorders to refrain from entering casinos. Another offering within the Commonwealth is the Department of Drug and Alcohol Program's Gambling Addiction Treatment Provider List. Since 2004, in each adaptation of Pennsylvania's gaming legislation, the legislature has allocated monies to DDAP for the payment of problem gambling treatment for those with gambling disorders. It is vital that we make the public aware of problem gambling programs like these, which, again, is the main objective of Problem Gambling Awareness Month. As always, if anyone in attendance today would like more information on treatment options in their area, I urge them to call or text 1-800-GAMBLER for more information. Unless you have any questions, I ask that the board approve a motion to adopt Resolution 2018-1-CPG.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt Resolution 2018-1-CPG as described by our Administrative Director, Ms. Yantis.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll stay. Okay. Before we go into the motion on the agenda for personnel actions, I just wanted to take an opportunity to publicly introduce and announce Danette Bixler-George. I know you have all had an opportunity to meet her, but from a public perspective, wanted to put it on the record that she is the Gaming Control Board's new Director of Human Resources. So.
Welcome.
Thank you.
In the future, Danette will actually present the motions for personnel hires, but seeing as this is her first meeting, I'll actually take the motion for today. So the Office of Human Resources has one motion for your consideration relative to the hiring of two individuals. First, Jesse Schell has been selected as a casino compliance representative in the Bureau of Casino Compliance assigned to Parks Casino. Mr. Schell completed the PGCB interview process, background investigation, and drug screening, and was originally scheduled to be approved at the March 7th, 2018 board meeting. However, in order to not delay his hiring due to the cancellation of that meeting, the board's Personnel Committee approved him to begin employment contingent upon the action being ratified by the full board at this meeting. As such, we ask that you agree to ratify Mr. Schell's employment. Second, Matthew Parentoni has been selected as a casino compliance representative in the Bureau of Casino Compliance assigned to Mount Airy Casino. Mr. Parentoni has completed the PGCB interview process, background investigation, and drug screening, and is recommended for hire by Director of Casino Compliance Jerry Stoll. Unless you have any questions, I ask that the board consider a motion to approve the hiring actions as indicated.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applicants as proposed by the Administrative Director.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's okay. We're okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? The motion is adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. What is yours? Oh, okay. That's the worst. We're okay. Doug?
Yes, good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Our first two agenda items relate to packages of temporary regulations which have been provided to the board in advance of today's meeting. The first temporary regulation before the board is number 125-212. This temporary rulemaking will provide a regulatory oversight structure for the conduct of fantasy sports contests in the Commonwealth as as authorized by Act 42 of 2017. Contained within the package are provisions addressing the application process, operation, accounting, and internal controls, as well as problem gambling initiatives that are being implemented in connection with Fantasy Contest. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'd ask for a motion to approve temporary Regulation 125-212.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt temporary regulation 125-212 as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next, we have two packets of temporary regulations, which Senior Counsel Laura Bird will present.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. The first packet of temporary regulations regarding interactive gaming for your approval consists of provisions intended to ensure the security and integrity of interactive gaming in the Commonwealth through regulations that will cover the physical and environmental controls for interactive gaming equipment, access limitations relative to interactive gaming equipment, and various system requirements, including software disclosures, shutdown and recovery standards, and required security policy outlines. The second packet of temporary rulemaking regarding interactive gaming has 3 topics, the first of which involves interactive game testing and controls. The second involves rules regarding advertising, promotions, and tournaments. And the third topic is live studio interactive gaming rules. These regulations establish guidelines for submission, review, and approval of interactive games, including the rules of the games, display standards, software authentication, and prohibited game components. The regulations regarding advertising, promotion, and tournaments mirrors our current board regulations for land-based casinos and sets forth the approval process for such matters. Finally, the rules regarding live studio interactive gaming require licensees seeking to offer this option to players in the Commonwealth to submit to the board for approval the location and the security measures of such operations. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have on these packets. If not, I'd ask for a motion to approve these temporary interactive gaming regulations.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? I just have one. With the adoption of these 2 regs, are we now in position to begin accepting applications? If you don't know, then perhaps
There will
Kevin?
be one additional package of regulations, which will conclude the overall scope of all of the regulations. We hope to have those to you in 2 weeks at the April 4th meeting, and then it'll all be out there at that point.
So just more for public notice here. We're expecting to begin to take applications when, Kevin?
April 16th, we'll begin the process of applications, and then it'll be rolled out from there.
Well, I just want to commend the staff for having done this so quickly so we can stay on schedule to expand gaming as the General Assembly has requested us to do. With that, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board adopt temporary regulation number 125-213, the first one described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
It'll be the second package. Yes.
Oh, okay. May I have a motion as to the second temporary reg package?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt temporary regulation number 125-214 as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Today, the board has just one petition before it for consideration, and that's the joint petition for approval of the change of control of Washington Trotting Association, LLC, pursuant to the transaction between Penn National Gaming and WTA's current parent company, Pinnacle Entertainment. This is the matter that was heard before the board commencing at 10 o'clock. The board has been provided with all of the relevant documentation as well as, obviously, hearing from the parties. The record on the matter is closed and it's appropriate for the board's motion on the petition.
Any questions or comments from the board?
No.
Just one brief comment. I just want to thank the folks who came in today. The presentation was extremely helpful and very informative and well laid out. I know you were hoping we could move quickly. On the other hand, we really appreciate the professionalism you gentlemen, I think it was only gentlemen, presented today. And at that point, I guess I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the joint petition for approval of change of control of Washington Trotting Association, LLC by Penn National Gaming, Inc., as described by the Office of Chief Counsel. I further move that the board impose a $3.75 million change of control fee relative to this transaction, payable within 3 business days of the closing on this transaction.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Thank you for coming. Safe travels to everyone as they head out.
Next, presenting withdrawals and reports and recommendations is Deputy Chief Counsel Steve Cook.
Good morning. The board has received several unopposed petitions to withdraw applications or surrender the credentials of individuals or businesses. Those individuals or businesses are as follows: Anthony Tomasello, James Jasinski, Caesars Entertainment Operating Company, Inc., Eric Press, Frederick John Kleisner, Gary Loveman, Jeffrey David Benjamin, Kelvin Davis, Ronan Larry Stauber, Timothy James Lambert, Kenneth K. Kewick, Mary Elizabeth Higgins, Stephen Winograd, Michael D. Cohen, Craig Justin Abrahams, Chester Downs Finance Corp., George K. Miller Jr., Kevin Flynn, Neil Abrams, Carl Ivor Peterson, John W.R. Payne, Leonard Hastings Ainsworth, Sean Michelle Yetter, and Michael Dreitzer. The Office of Enforcement Counsel has no objection to any of these petitions, and as a result, if the board were to grant same, they'd be doing so without prejudice to each petitioner.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue orders to approve the withdrawals and surrenders as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next before the board for consideration are 7 reports and recommendations received from the Office of Hearings and Appeals. In each case, the person that is the subject of the report and recommendation has received a copy of it and was also informed that the board would be taking their matter up today and that they could come forward and briefly address the board before a vote. If any of these individuals are present and wish to be heard, I'd ask them to come forward when their matter is called. The first report and recommendation before the board stems from a request to be removed from the self-exclusion list. Pursuant to the findings of fact and the report and recommendation issued in this matter, on September 5th, 2015, an individual with the initials AB entered Harrah's Chester Downs Casino and requested to be placed on the self-exclusion list for a period of 5 years. The casino compliance representative who placed AB on the list testified that he conducted the mandatory interview with AB and completed all of the required paperwork and procedures. Thereafter, AB signed the acknowledgement form selecting the 5-year self-exclusion period. Since AB's placement on the list, he has been cited on 3 separate occasions for criminal trespass in various Pennsylvania casinos. On September 11th, 2017, AB filed a request to be removed from the voluntary self-exclusion list. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed an answer objecting to the request, and a hearing was held on November 19th. AB appeared and testified in his own behalf, essentially testifying that he is employed as a driver, and that necessitated his entry onto a casino gaming floor. The report and recommendation issued subsequent to the hearing had a hearing officer finding that AB is not eligible to apply for removal of the list, in that the 5-year self-exclusion period had not yet run, and as a result, the recommendation to the board is that he remain on the list, and that matter is now ripe for the board's consideration.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding AB's petition for removal from the self-exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter to be heard by the board is the report and recommendation pertaining to Wai-Ming Ma's request for removal from the board's involuntary exclusion list. On January of 2014, Mr. Ma, who was under 21 years of age at the time, was discovered gaming at Sugar House Casino. As a result of this incident, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition requesting that Mr. Ma be placed in the board exclusion list. He did not respond to that petition, and as a result, the board placed him on the list until July 18, 2016, his 22nd birthday, after which he could petition for removal from the list. On September 26, 2017, after he turned 22, Mr. Ma filed a request to be removed from the exclusion list. However, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed an answer objecting to the removal, stating that Mr. Ma had actually been cited on 2 occasions for trespassing on the Parks Casino while he was still on the exclusion list. Mr. Ma requested a hearing, which was held on November 21, 2017. He then failed to appear for that hearing, OEC putting into evidence the fact that he was placed on the list, violated the list on 2 occasions, and as a result, hearing only that evidence, the hearing officer recommended that Mr. Ma remain on the board's exclusion list, and that matter is now right.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearing and Appeals regarding Wai-Ming Ma's petition for removal from the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter to be heard by the board pertains to the report and recommendation of Marcus Brown. On March 10, 2017, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition requesting Mr. Brown be placed on the board's exclusion list for allegedly passing 12 counterfeit $50 bills while buying in at a blackjack table at the Valley Forge Casino Resort. Mr. Brown answered the petition denying knowledge that the bills he used were counterfeit because there were disputed facts. A hearing in this matter was held on November 30, 2017. Although receiving proper notice, Mr. Brown then failed to appear at the hearing, and it was held in his absence. Office of Enforcement Counsel put in evidence of the passing of the counterfeit bills, as well as the fact that Mr. Brown subsequently pled guilty to 1 count of forgery related to that incident. As a result of that evidence, the report and recommendation issued recommends that Mr. Brown be placed on the board's exclusion list, and that is the recommendation before the board.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the placement of Marcus Brown on the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion is adopted.
Al Davis's matter is the next report and recommendation before the board. Briefly, on July 12, 2017, the board issued a default judgment order placing Mr. Davis on the exclusion list after he allegedly took $60 in chips from the dealer's float at a gaming table at Harrah's and subsequent thereto got into a physical altercation with the security officer. In August of 2017, Mr. Davis filed a request to be removed from the list, stating that he didn't know he was on the list until he entered a casino and was informed of same. On September 13, 2017, the board issued an order remanding the matter to the Office of Hearings and Appeals for a full evidentiary hearing relative to the facts that underlied his original placement on the list. That hearing was held on October 19, 2017. Enforcement Counsel and Mr. Davis appeared at the hearing. Enforcement Counsel putting on evidence, including video evidence of what transpired on the gaming floor, and Mr. Davis's defense being that the witnesses fabricated their testimony and that the video surveillance was all edited. Hearing all that evidence, the hearing officer recommended that Mr. Davis be placed on and remain on the exclusion list, and that's the recommendation before the board.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearing and Appeals regarding the placement of Al Davis on the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Montrez Lewis's report and recommendation is next before the board. On August 8th, 2017, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Mr. Lewis on the board's involuntary exclusion list, alleging that on May 27th, 2017, while gaming at the Valley Forge Casino Resort, he placed a bet with another patron's money. Specifically, Mr. Lewis was seated next to another patron at a roulette table. They spoke briefly, and at one point, the second patron stood up from the table, leaving $600 worth of unwagered chips at his seat. Mr. Lewis placed a wager of his own chips, as well as betting the patron who had just left the tables $600. The wagers lost, and upon the patron's returning to the table, he saw that his chips had been wagered without his consent and demanded that the money be returned from the casino. Valley Forge staff refused to return the money and called the state police to the scene. Mr. Lewis was criminally charged with theft, but the charges were later withdrawn upon his paying full restitution to the patron. During the October 25, 2017 hearing in this matter, Enforcement Counsel argued that Mr. Lewis and the other patron were actually co-conspirators to defraud the casino in a scheme that, had the bet won, they would have remained silent and taken their winnings, but if it lost, the patron would claim a theft had occurred. Mr. Lewis appeared at his hearing pro se and testified on his own behalf. During his testimony, Mr. Lewis admitted taking the money and betting the other patron's chips without consent to do so, stating only that he felt the patron wanted him to place the $600 wager. After hearing all of the evidence and the record being closed, the hearing officer issued a report and recommendation recommending that Mr. Lewis not be placed on the board's exclusion list, as the Office of Enforcement Counsel had not provided sufficient evidence of a conspiracy. And that's the recommendation before the board at this point.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board reject the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the placement of Montez Lewis on the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel, and that Mr. Lewis be placed on the board's involuntary exclusion list for reasons which will be outlined in the board's order.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion is adopted.
The next report and recommendation before the board pertains to Dylan Groff. Mr. Groff was issued a gaming permit during August of 2017 to work as a table games dealer at Sands Bethworks. On December 5, 2017, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for an emergency suspension of Mr. Groff's gaming employee occupation permit after receiving notice that Mr. Groff had reported an arrest and pending criminal charges to a casino compliance representative at Sands. Specifically, he indicated that he'd been charged with numerous criminal offenses, including 2 felonies, stemming from an auto accident that had occurred 2 months prior on September 22, 2017. The undisputed facts are that while driving his vehicle, Mr. Groff was actively using his cell phone and, while distracted, struck a 12-year-old girl who was walking on the shoulder of the road. Mr. Groff stayed at the scene and was cooperative with the police. Unfortunately, the young girl passed away from her injuries. As a result of the criminal charges, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requested an emergency suspension, and the Executive Director issued an emergency suspension. Pursuant to the board regulations, a hearing on the validity of the suspension was held. Enforcement Counsel appeared and offered testimony of the accident and the criminal charges. Mr. Groff did not appear at that hearing. A report and recommendation was subsequently issued recommending that the suspension remain in place, and that is the report and the recommendation before the board.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearing and Appeals regarding the suspension of Dylan Groff's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The final report and recommendation before the board today pertains to Johnny Harmon. In August of 2015, Mr. Harmon was issued a gaming employee occupation permit to work as a table games dealer at Harrah's, Philadelphia. On November 15th, 2017, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for an emergency suspension of Mr. Harmon's gaming employee occupation permit after receiving notification that he'd been charged with two felony theft-related charges and 2 gambling offenses. Specifically, on September 15th, 2017, while working a roulette table at Harrah's, Mr. Harmon tampered with play, repeatedly interfering with the roll of the ball. His conduct resulted in the loss to Harrah's of over $19,000. As a result of Mr. Harmon's actions, the board's executive director issued an emergency order of suspension as requested by OEC. A hearing was held on December 14th, 2017, relative to the validity of that suspension. Mr. Harmon failed to attend the hearing and put on any evidence, and having heard from only Enforcement Counsel relative to the facts I just outlined, the hearing officer issued a report and recommendation recommending that the suspension remain in place.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the suspension of Johnny Harmon's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
And that concludes the matters of the Office of Chief Counsel.
Thank you, Doug. Sue?
Thank you, Chairman Barish and members of the board. Before the board today will be 1 slot machine manufacturer renewal, 2 gaming junket renewals, 1,238 principal, key gaming, and non-gaming employee applicants, and in addition, there will be the consideration of 12 gaming service provider applicants. The first matter for your consideration is the renewal of Lightning Gaming, Inc.'s slot machine manufacturer license. Lightning Gaming is a Pennsylvania-based Nevada corporation that manufactures and sells slot machines. The Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement has completed its investigation of the company, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with a background investigation and suitability report. I have provided you with a draft order and ask that the board consider the order to renew the slot machine manufacturer license.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve Lighting Gaming, Inc.'s slot machine manufacturer license renewal as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next for your consideration is the renewal of the gaming junket license for Kenneth Froome Tours, Inc. Kenneth Froome Tours is a Florida-based company that provides junket-related services in several states. The Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement has completed its investigation, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with a background investigation and suitability report. I have provided you with a draft order and ask that you consider the renewal of the license for Kenneth Froome Tours, Inc.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve Kenneth Froome Tours, Inc.'s Gaming Junket Enterprise license renewal as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also for your consideration is the renewal of the Gaming Junket Enterprise license for Kotler VIP Tours, Inc. Kotler is a New Jersey business that conducts junket business in several states. The Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement has completed its investigation of the company, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with the background investigation and suitability report. I've provided you with a draft order and ask that you consider the renewal of the license for Kotler VIP Tours, Inc.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve Kotler VIP Tours, Inc.'s Gaming Junket Enterprise license renewal as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next is the approval of principal and key employee licenses. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a proposed order for 7 principals and 3 key employee licenses. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of principal and key employee licenses as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also, there are temporary principal and key employee licenses. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order regarding the issuance of temporary licenses for 6 principals and 6 key employees. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the issuance of temporary principal and key employee credentials as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Motion's adopted.
In addition, there are gaming permits and non-gaming registrations. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a list of 880 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted temporary or full occupation permits and 283 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted registrations under the authority delegated to the Bureau of Licensing. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the order.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of gaming employee occupation permits and non-gaming employee registrations as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also for your consideration are recommendations of denial for 1 gaming service provider, 2 gaming, and 5 non-gaming employee applicants. In each case, the applicant was notified that he, or she was being recommended for denial and failed to request a hearing within the specified time frame. The Bureau of Licensing has provided you with orders addressing the applicants who the Office of Enforcement Counsel has recommended for denial. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the denials.
Enforcement Council continues to request denial in each instance.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board deny the gaming service provider, gaming and non-gaming employee applications as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
I have a second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next for your consideration are withdrawal requests for key gaming and non-gaming employees. In each case, the license permit or registration is no longer required. For today's meeting, I have provided the board with a list of 2 key, 29 gaming, and 14 non-gaming employee withdrawals for approval. I ask that the board consider the orders approving the list of withdrawals.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the withdrawal of key employee gaming and non-gaming employee applications as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Finally, for your consideration are gaming service provider registrations. The Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order and an attached list of 12 registered gaming service provider applicants. I ask that the board consider the order registering these applicants.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applications for gaming service provider registration as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
That concludes the matters of the Bureau of Licensing.
Thank you, Susan. Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Okay, today we're going to have to switch up our agenda a little bit. The Office of Enforcement Counsel will request that the board table the proposed consent agreement scheduled to be heard today. Representatives from each party contacted us to request that the matters be tabled due to impermissible travel. We have no objection to that, so with that, in the board's agreement, we'll move on into the remaining matters on the agenda.
Thank you.
As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel will present 24 matters for the board's consideration today, consisting of 6 revocations, 5 suspensions, and 13 involuntary exclusions. The first 11 matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed complaints seeking the revocation of 3 gaming employee occupation permits and 3 non-gaming registrations, and the suspension of 1 gaming employee occupation permit and 4 non-gaming registrations which were issued by the board. Each complaint has been filed with the board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the person named in each complaint. The person named in each complaint failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment and properly served the same upon each named person. Therefore, the facts in each complaint are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. In each instance, we will provide a brief summary of the facts and request the appropriate board action.
Good morning, Chairman, fellow board members. John Pokoneski, P-O-K-I-N-I, E-W-S-K-I, with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a revocation of the non-gaming employee registration issued to Richard Edwards. Mr. Edwards was previously employed as a housekeeper at Presque Isle Downs and Casino. On June 17, 2017, Mr. Edwards was arrested and criminally charged with 1 felony count of criminal trespass, breaking into a structure, 2 related misdemeanor counts, and 1 related summary count. Ultimately, Mr. Edwards would plead guilty to criminal trespass, breaking into a structure, a second-degree felony, and theft from a motor vehicle, a third-degree misdemeanor. At this time, OEC requests that the board revoke the non-gaming employee registration issued to Richard Edwards.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Richard Edwards' non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Tamara Haken, H-A-K-E-N, with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the suspension of the non-gaming employee registration issued to Drew George. On September 13, 2017, Mr. George was charged with 1 felony 3-count of fleeing or attempting to elude an officer, 7 related misdemeanor counts, and 5 related summary accounts. All the charges remain pending in the Berks County Court of Common Pleas. As a result, OEC requests that the non-gaming employee registration issued to Drew George be suspended.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the suspension of Drew George's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the suspension of the gaming employee occupation permit issued to Brianna Hawk, who previously worked as a security officer at Sands Bethworks Casino. On October 1st, 2017, Ms. Hawk was charged with felony manufacture, delivery, or possession with intent to manufacture or deliver, and related misdemeanor charges. Ms. Hawk entered a guilty plea for misdemeanor possession, and the felony charge was withdrawn. OEC maintains its request that the gaming employee occupation permit issued to Brianna Hawk be suspended.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the suspension of Brianna Lee Hawk's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I should have said Enforcement Counsel. Corrected.
Fine. All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the revocation of the non-gaming employee registration issued to Alondra Main. Ms. Main was previously employed as a cocktail server at Hollywood Casino. On September 19, 2017, Ms. Main was charged with theft by unlawful taking for conducting a scheme whereby she accepted payment for drink orders from patrons and then charged those drinks to comp cards belonging to other patrons while pocketing the money she was given as payment. Ms. Main admitted to conducting the scheme from 15 to 20 times per night. Ms. Main was terminated along with being charged. The charge is still pending in the Dauphin County Court of Common Pleas. OEC requests that the non-gaming employee registration issued to Alondra Main be revoked.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the revocation of Alondra Main's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the revocation of the non-gaming employee registration issued to Brandon Underkoffler. On October 26, 2017, Mr. Underkoffler was charged with felony manufacture, delivery, or possession with intent to manufacture or deliver, and 3 related misdemeanors. The felony charge remains pending in the Luzerne County Court of Common Pleas. OEC requests that the non-gaming employee registration issued to Brandon Underkoffler be revoked.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Brandon Underkoffler's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Ashley Gabriel, Gabrielle, Office of Enforcement Counsel. I'll present the next two matters. Next on the agenda for the board's consideration is a complaint seeking the suspension of the non-gaming employee registration issued to Alyssa Murray. Ms. Murray engaged in theft while in the course of her employment as a bartender at the Get Wet Ultra Pool at the Mount Airy Casino Resort in Mount Pocono, Pennsylvania. On September 1st, 2017, during routine live surveillance review, Ms. Murray was observed taking $6 out of the cash register and placing the $6 into her tip storage container on the counter. Ms. Murray was terminated as a result of her actions. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board suspend the non-gaming employee registration issued to Alyssa Murray for a period of 30 days or as otherwise ordered by the board.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the suspension of Alyssa Murray's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next on the agenda for the board's consideration is a complaint seeking the suspension of the non-gaming employee registration issued to Sean Smith. Mr. Smith was arrested by the Philadelphia Police Department on August 27, 2017, and charged with firearms not to be carried without license, a third-degree felony, and carry firearms on public streets or public property in Philadelphia when he was allegedly found carrying a concealed firearm without a license in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Mr. Smith's criminal matter is pending. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board suspend the non-gaming employee registration issued to Sean Smith.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the suspension of Sean Smith's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. John Crowe, CROHE, for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter for the board's consideration is a complaint to suspend the non-gaming employee registration held by Kara Schwartz, who was charged on June 14, 2017, with 2 summary driving offenses as well as 4 counts of driving under the influence. Ms. Schwartz pleaded guilty to 1 count of driving under the influence on February 13, 2018, and all other charges were withdrawn or dismissed. Ms. Schwartz was also charged on June 22, 2017, with manufacture, delivery, or possession with intent to manufacture or deliver, felony, intentional possession of a controlled substance, and use or possession of drug paraphernalia after being found in possession of multiple bags of marijuana in a vehicle in a parking lot of a technical high school. This matter is still pending. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that the non-gaming employee registration held by Kara Schwartz be suspended.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the suspension of Kara Schwartz's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good afternoon, Chairman Barish, members of the board. Dustin Miller on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Next on the agenda for the board's consideration is a complaint to revoke Shantae Pendleton's gaming employee permit. The complaint alleged Ms. Pendleton, while employed as a player services agent and conducting her licensed work-related duties at Sugar House Casino, engaged in unsuitable behavior by uploading free slot play and complimentaries to patrons' reward accounts when the patrons were not entitled to them. Ms. Pendleton was terminated from Sugar House Casino for her actions. She is not presently employed in Pennsylvania's gaming industry. Accordingly, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board revoke the gaming employee occupation permit issued to Shantae Pendleton.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Shantae Pendleton's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next on the agenda for the board's consideration is a complaint to revoke Sean Worthy's gaming employee permit. Mr. Worthy, while conducting his licensed work-related duties as a security officer at Sugar House Casino, engaged in unsuitable behavior by being intoxicated and under the influence of illegal drugs. Mr. Worthy was terminated from Sugar House Casino for his actions. He is not presently employed in Pennsylvania's gaming industry. Accordingly, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board revoke the gaming employee occupation permit issued to Sean Worthy.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Sean Worthy's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next on the agenda for the board's consideration is a complaint to revoke Raymond Smith's gaming employee permit for stealing vouchers from Sugar House Casino while employed there as a slot technician. Mr. Smith was terminated from Sugar House Casino for his actions, and he is not currently employed in Pennsylvania's gaming industry. Accordingly, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board revoke the gaming employee occupation permit issued to Raymond Smith.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Raymond Smith's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The remaining matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed petitions seeking the involuntary exclusion of individuals whose presence in a licensed facility are inimical to the interests of the Commonwealth and their licensed gaming therein. In each instance, the petition for exclusion has been filed with the Board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individual named in each petition. The individual named in the petition failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment in each instance and properly served the same upon each named individual. Therefore, all facts in each petition are deemed admitted, all filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. In each instance, if the board orders the proposed exclusion, each individual's photo, personal identifiers, and a summary of the inimical conduct will be placed on the board's public website.
Questions or comments from the board? No, we haven't heard it yet.
The next matter on the agenda is also the placement of Raymond Smith on the exclusion list. Mr. Smith was the individual that we previously revoked this morning. He was employed as a slot technician at Sugar House Casino and was recorded on surveillance stealing vouchers. Further investigation revealed Mr. Smith gave the vouchers to a former Sugar House Player Services agent, Danita Daniels, to cash out. Mr. Smith was arrested by Pennsylvania State Police and charged with theft offenses. Mr. Smith was terminated from Sugar House Casino for his actions, and he's not presently employed in Pennsylvania's gaming industry. Accordingly, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board enter judgment upon default and place Mr. Smith on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the addition of Raymond Smith to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next on the agenda for the board's consideration is a request to place Danita Daniels on the exclusion list. As I previously described, Ms. Daniels was the former employee at Sugar House Casino who was a player services agent who received the stolen vouchers from Mr. Smith, and she was recorded on surveillance cashing those stolen vouchers. Ms. Daniels is also not currently employed in Pennsylvania's gaming industry. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board enter judgment upon default and place Ms. Daniels on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Danita Daniels to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next on the agenda for the board's consideration is a request to place Gary Golden on the exclusion list as a result of his conduct at Sugar House Casino. Mr. Golden indecently exposed himself to a female employee of Sugar House Casino while he was at the casino working for a cleaning services company. Mr. Golden was permanently evicted from Sugar House Casino and terminated from the cleaning services company. Accordingly, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests the board enter judgment upon default and place Mr. Golden on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the addition of Gary Golden to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next on the agenda for the board's consideration is a request to place Jeffrey Toll on the exclusion list. Mr. Toll was the subject of a suspicious activity report investigation at Sugar House Casino, where he was investigated for his involvement in the placing of $100 bills in slot machines without playing and immediately attempting to cash out, which jammed the slot machines. The incident led to a further investigation of Mr. Toll and a determination that his presence in Pennsylvania casinos may be considered inimical to the interests of the state or of licensed gaming therein as a result of his extensive criminal history. Accordingly, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests the board enter judgment upon default and place Mr. Toll on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Jeffrey Warren Toll to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Chairman, members of the board, John Crowe, CROHE, again for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter for the board's consideration is a petition to add Ryan Taylor to the excluded persons list as he struck the touchscreen portion of a slot machine at Mohegan's on Pocono, shattering the screen and causing $1,605.72 worth of damage. Mr. Taylor was charged with criminal mischief, a misdemeanor too. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that Ryan Taylor be added to the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Ryan Taylor to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next is a request to place Julio Cruz Estrella on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Cruz Estrella and 6 other individuals were observed perpetrating a scam by illegally switching out non-valued chips while playing roulette at Sands. As a result of their roulette scam, the total monetary gain to the suspects was $13,440. The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Julio Cruz Estrella on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Julio Cruz Estrella to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. Benjamin Farrell, Ferrell, the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The following 2 matters regarding petitions to place Raghu Basnet and Asongwe Asangambang on the board's involuntary exclusion list share the same fact pattern. On October 20th, 2017, Mr. Basnet and Mr. Asangambang together stole a total of $1,000 in gaming chips from another patron while playing roulette at Harrah's Philadelphia. Both individuals were arrested and charged with 1 count each of theft by unlawful taking. Mr. Basnet was also charged with criminal trespass based upon a permanent eviction notice issued to him by Harrah's Philadelphia in September. All charges against Mr. Basnet and Mr. Asangambang remain pending. At this time, OEC requests the board issue an order placing Raghu Basnet on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Asongwe. Are we on Raghu or Asongwe?
Well,
My apologies. I did them out of order.
Okay.
If you indulge us, I can do it.
No.
Well, let's take
Right,
Mr.
good.
Basnet first. So, who has Basnet's motion?
I do. Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Raghu Basnet to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Now, if you'd swing back.
At this time, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Asongwe Asangambang on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the addition of Asongwe Asangambang. Thank you. to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye. Aye.
All in favor? Fine. None opposed. The motion's adopted.
The next matter for your consideration is a petition to place William Doherty on the board's involuntary exclusion list. On November 11, 2016, Mr. Doherty pickpocketed an envelope containing approximately $4,400 from another patron while playing Midi Baccarat at Harrah's, Philadelphia. At this time, OEC requests the board issue an order placing William Doherty on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the addition of William Doherty to the PGCB's involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter for your consideration is a petition to place Renisha Lee on the board's involuntary exclusion list. On September 28, 2017, Ms. Lee left her 12-year-old son unattended while she gamed at Harrah's, Philadelphia. Ms. Lee's son was discovered when he left Ms. Lee's vehicle, entered Harrah's, Philadelphia, and proceeded to the security podium located near the main entrance to the gaming floor. Ms. Lee left her son unattended for approximately 1 hour and 41 minutes. No charges were filed against Ms. Lee. At this time, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Ms. Lee on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Renisha Lee to the BGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Ms. Lee shall be removed from the list after 2 years.
Second.
No, 1 second, please.
Oh, sorry.
All in favor?
We have a second.
Aye.
We need a second.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a second?
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
Yeah, there we go.
I was just unclear on whether Mrs. Lee shall be removed from the list after 2 years. Would that be automatic removal, or would she have to petition?
It's automatic removal. With that qualification, let me just do that again.
That's implied. Absolutely.
Okay. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good afternoon, Chairman Barish, members of the board. David Tepper, Tepper, on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Next on the agenda is a request to place Calvin Jones Jr. on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Jones was overpaid $9,000 by the Cage Hollywood Casino and refused to return the money when requested to by the casino and the Pennsylvania State Police. Mr. Jones was charged by the Pennsylvania State Police in regards to this matter. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board add Calvin Jones Jr. to the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the addition of Calvin Jones Jr. to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Dustin Miller, once again on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter today is a request for placement on the board's excluded persons list involving Paul Petrie. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Mr. Petrie on the exclusion list on October 30th, 2017, after he was found in possession of methamphetamine and Xanax at Parks Casino on April 28th, 2017. Mr. Petrie was criminally charged with intentional possession of a controlled substance by a person not registered for his actions. Mr. Petrie also had an outstanding warrant from Montgomery County for possession of a controlled substance with intent to deliver, a felony offense, at the time of his arrest at Parks Casino. Based upon the foregoing, the Office of Enforcement Counsel asks that the board place Paul Petrie on the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Paul Petrie to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The final matter today is a request for placement on the board's excluded persons list involving Pierre Smith. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Mr. Smith on the exclusion list on June 6, 2017, after Mr. Smith followed a patron of Parks Casino away from the property and robbed her on November 16, 2016, and ran over the patron with a vehicle when fleeing. Additionally, Mr. Smith attempted to rob a patron of Parks Casino in a similar manner on November 14, 2016. Mr. Smith was criminally charged with robbery, aggravated assault, criminal attempt robbery, theft by unlawful taking, receiving stolen property, and simple assault by Bensalem Township Police for his actions. Based upon the foregoing, the Office of Enforcement Counsel asks that the board place Pierre Smith on the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the addition of Pierre Smith to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Thank you. That concludes our business.
Thank you all for coming here today. Next, we have our public comment period. As I understand it, we don't have anybody in the audience registered to speak today. Is there anyone here who wishes to make a public statement to the board? Seeing none, hearing none, I will now move to adjournment. That concludes today's the business of today's meeting. As I mentioned earlier, our next scheduled Category 4 auction will be on April 4th, 2018, weather permitting, at 10 a.m. in this room, with the next board's public meeting to commence at the conclusion of that auction. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Travel safely, one and all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chairman. Bye.